I'm going to leave the floor to our moderator for this session on pharmacovigilance, and I'm sure you will be very excited. And Peter, you have the floor.
So thanks, Agnes, and thanks for asking me to moderate this last session, which is on patient safety and pharmacovigilance. I like the title Focus on Patient Safety, because pharmacovigilance is one of those words that if you're not in the game, nobody understands what you're talking about. And pharmacovigilance is fundamentally monitoring the safety of medicines to try and optimize the safe and effective use of medicines. But fundamentally, what that's trying to do is to support patient safety. We have 4 presentations for you today. We are going to start off with an overview of the EU system, which our colleague Aniela Santoro will provide. We're then going to talk about risk management planning. So that's the proactive part of monitoring the safety of medicines, really. And we have Claire Espinas, who will present to you. We'll then talk about the European database of suspected adverse drug reaction reports, which is called Eudravigilance, and how we use those data to try and detect new drug safety issues. And Rodrigo Postigo will present. And finally, we will talk about something called periodic safety update reports, which sounds probably a bit alien to many of you, but essentially these are core benefit risk evaluations sent in by the industry on a periodic basis for the products they have on the market. After each of the presentations, each presentation will last about sort of 13, 14 minutes. And after each of them, we'll then take questions. So please feel free to put your hand up, press your buttons, and we'll have a debate after each presentation. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Aniela Santoro, who works as a scientific administrator in the Department of Pharmacovigilance and Epidemiology, to talk about an overview of the European system. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. As Peter was saying, I'm going to give you today a brief overview of the EU pharmacovigilance system, hoping that this will set the scene for the more detailed presentation from my colleagues. If we want to trace the roots of pharmacovigilance, we should probably look back at over 50 years ago, when the first EU legislation on medicine was released. From then, 30 years down the line, the establishment of the European Medicine Agency, and from that moment on, a constellation of events at a much faster pace has taken place. In 2004, the introduction of risk management plan, then the progressive involvement of patient and healthcare professionals into the regulatory process, with even the establishment of working parties dedicated to them, and with their participation in the work of some of the committees that we have here at the agency. 2012, a momentous date when the revised pharmacovigilance legislation became operational, and this brought about a major strengthening and rationalization of the system with the creation of a committee dedicated to pharmacovigilance, the Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee, that is also called PRAC. Last year, November, a new enhanced Eudravigilance system, a new release of the system with enhanced functionalities that allows, for example, for the first time, marketing authorization holder to have access to data on adverse drug reaction that are in the database. And for sure, more is to come and will be seen in the next few years. I would like now to ask you to reflect, to zoom a little bit out from the details and to reflect on the goals of the system. And we can say that this can be best represented with an image of a pendulum that oscillates between, on the one hand, the need to promote public health by fulfilling unmet medical need, by putting in place system that support authorization decision, and on the other hand, the imperative of pharmacovigilance, that is truly the protection of public health, by putting in place system to monitor new safety issues that allow us to take rapidly decision when appropriate, effective action that translates into positive outcomes. Pharmacovigilance is truly embedded into the life cycle of a product, with the planning of risk minimization activity starting early on, when marketing authorization holders are encouraged to plan how they are going to further characterize and minimize risk that will become evident when the product is used in larger population. And then moving on in post-marketing, the collection of information on adverse drug reaction, their analysis in the framework of signal detection, the overall evaluation assessment of the evidence on a safety issue that leads to take robust regulatory action to protect public health. And obviously, the communication of those for the benefit of patients. But the picture wouldn't be complete without mentioning the measurement of the effectiveness of the pharmacovigilance activity, and through the auditing of the system, inspection, capacity building, and I'm sure you heard a little bit about inspection before and so on, we ensure that we can always rely on the best methodologies and that we set ourselves on a journey of continuous improvement. Here is just to mention a few of the evidence that can be taken into account when monitoring the safety of the medicine. Certainly, the evidence from clinical trials, from the medical literature, from spontaneous report, from registries, and so on. We cannot try to go into the opposite exercise, so delving a little bit into the details of the system and its components. We shall start with the European Medicine Regulatory Network, which is composed by the European Medicine Agency, with the main task to coordinate the scientific resources made available by the member states, the national competent authorities that are responsible for the safety of the products that are authorized on their territories, responsible to conduct inspection there, the European Commission, which is responsible for the authorization of centrally authorized products, as well as for varying them, or when needed, for suspending and possibly withdrawing this. In figures, this translates into an orchestra of 7 committees, and I already mentioned the prominent role of the PRAC as far as pharmacovigilance is concerned, supported by 28 working parties, and by a pool of around 4,000 scientific experts who are drawn across the EU in a truly global effort to guarantee that the best expertise is always in place. Going a little bit more and zooming further in, the panorama wouldn't be complete if we didn't mention also the role that other stakeholders have, like the pharma industry, that obviously makes the medicine available, researchers, which have got a very important role in fostering continuous improvement and development of methodologies, the patient that are right in this slide at the center, because as Peter was saying, all that we do is to protect their health, but also because they can enrich the regulatory process by contributing the user perspective. And last but not least, healthcare professionals that similarly inform the regulatory process by providing the clinical perspective. This slide is to give you an overview of what are the main pillars of the EU pharmacovigilance system. I already mentioned a few, like the fact that it is centered around patient, and the patient and the healthcare professional have got a unique opportunity to engage, a opportunity that across the time has increased. It is risk proportionate. It integrates benefit risk, and this will be further detailed by my colleague Gael that will speak about PSUR. It is based on clear role and responsibility, on continuous improvement, on transparency, and on best scientific evidence. And I will try to give, at least for a couple of examples. In terms of transparency, you can see here a list of some of the initiatives to foster this. This list is not for sure exhaustive, but it is a list representative of the one we consider significant. Like never before, patients have got today access to an unprecedented level of information simply by looking at our website, for example, and they are at click distance from information on anonymized information on ADR event, ADR reaction, by consulting the ADR portal. They can obviously consult on the website what are the practical recommendations, signals that are discussed there, as well as they can learn about the outcome of major safety review that are carried out in Europe in the context of referral, for example. In terms of communication, important to notice here that we engage, for example, with marketing authorization holder early on when we know that a signal will be discussed at PRAC. We share also relevant documents to put them really in the best position to support the assessment process. We coordinate safety announcement across the national competent authorities to ensure that a harmonized message is delivered to patient and healthcare professionals across the EU. And when we anticipate media attention, we work at lines to take as a help in responding to queries from this source. In terms of engagement, already mentioned the role of patient healthcare professional, the progressive involvement, and I want here to zoom on one particular aspect, one particular novelty that has been introduced by the revised pharmacovigilance legislation, public hearing that are a true opportunity to listen to patients and to learn, for example, about their acceptability of a specific risk in the context of, for example, alternative therapeutic option, or also to listen to them and to learn about the effectiveness of risk minimization measure. And I think it's worth mentioning here that we had a first such example in September, valproate and evaluation of the risk in pregnancy, which was extremely educational and extremely useful. In terms of cooperation, this takes several shapes. For example, the sharing of information on drug safety issue in the framework of teleconferences with FDA and with other regulatory authorities that participate as observer, or the communication on any measure that is taken on centrally authorized product, but that is deemed to have a possible bearing also in countries outside of the EU. And more for sure could be said. In terms of another pillar, the continuous improvement and capacity building, again, some example here, not the whole story, but for sure significant. The IMI Protect project that contributed to developing evidence-based methodologies in pharmacovigilance and brought about enhancement in the area, for example, signal detection and so on. The EU Network Training Center that spread good scientific and regulatory practices across the EU. The SCOPE project that promoted best practices in the EU network and actually delivered very important training material accessible to pharmacovigilance staff. The NCEPT, which is truly a collaboration and a platform, let's say a way through which experts in pharmacovigilance and pharmacoepidemiology can actually be pooled and can thus facilitating the conduct of multi-center and large epidemiological studies. I will finish off by referring you to some useful reading that will allow you to delve more into the detail, for sure, the good pharmacovigilance practices that are measured, drawn up in Europe to facilitate the conduct of pharmacovigilance, and you will find also a useful index there to help you navigate through the model you are more interested in, and an article which is about how the European Union pharmacovigilance system works that was published last year in Drug Safety, and that gives you some more detail about the different components and aspects. I will finish here, leaving the time for some questions, and then to my colleagues to go into the details of the system.
Thanks very much, Agnello. So please, thank you. Stay put, stay put. Bit of a whistle-stop tour, looking at the European pharmacovigilance system, the stakeholders, the people that have specific responsibilities, emphasizing that the monitoring of safety and taking action to minimize risk, really the planning for that starts before a product goes on the market, with particularly discussions on risk management plans, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. Are there any questions on the system before we go into a few points of more detail? Okay, if not, Agnello, thank you. We'll save the time. And it's a pleasure then to introduce Claire Espinas, who's going to talk to us about the proactive part of pharmacovigilance, which is the risk management planning. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So with the next 10 slides, I will take you through the key principle of the risk management plan in Europe. So as a way of introduction, I can start by explaining why we need a risk management plan. So at the time of authorization of a medicine, the benefit-risk balance of the product is judged positive in the specified indication. And we have usually a good evidence of the efficacy of the product and also a good evidence of the most common adverse reaction. However, there are still things that we don't know at the time of the authorization of a new medicines. So not all adverse reaction and risk might have been identified at the time of authorization, because we are moving from a very controlled environment, which are the clinical trials, on a sort of limited population. And we are moving, once the product is on the market, to a real-life setting with a much broader population, more heterogeneous population. Therefore, in the post-authorization phase, we can still, we might observe further adverse drug reaction, which might be rare, delayed from long-term exposure, due to the medication errors, off-label use, all of these aspects, abuse, misuse, that we can encounter during the post-authorization phase of the product. So that's why the applicant, the marketing authorization holder, has the obligation to put in place and to maintain a set of pharmacovigilance activities and intervention designed to identify, characterize, prevent, or minimize risk relating to a medicinal product. So that's what we call the risk management plan, EU RMP. And on the slide, I've put the key documents that the applicant and also the network use when preparing and reviewing the EU RMP, which is the GVP Module 5 and RMP template. You can find both documents on the EMA website. So now let's have a look at the structure of an RMP. So it's divided in 6 parts, and with the next slide, I will focus on the 3 parts, which are safety specification, pharmacovigilance plan, and risk mitigation measures. So to start with the safety specification information. So this part is about identifying safety concerns for your product. So the way it works, you look at all the elements that will help you make an analysis of your pharmaceutical product, the target population, the disease, and you put together all these components, you assess them, and as a result, you come up with a list of safety concerns for your product, which are divided in important identify risk, where there is a established relationship between the risk and the pharmaceutical product, an important potential risk, where this link is suspected between the risk and the product, but is not fully established, and missing information, which represents gap in the knowledge about the safety of the medicinal product. So now that you have identified your safety concern, the question is, what are you going to do about them? And that's when the pharmacovigilance plan comes in. So it's divided in 2 main parts. Let's say the routine activities, which consist of collecting adverse drug reaction, the case report follow-up, signal detection, PSUR, annual report, literature review. Those are the minimum set of activities that the applicant has to do for every single product. They are the same for all the products. And another part of the pharmacovigilance plan is the additional activities. So it's going a step further, let's say, it's what we call the post-authorization safety studies, is to further investigate one of the risks that you have identified, or if you have some missing information, you put in place some studies to further look into this. An example could be a patient registry, which is more an observational studies to collect a uniform set of information. It can be based on the disease, so across different medicinal products, or it can be based on per medicinal product. Sometimes it's only one applicant, one company that will be part of this registry, but sometimes you have registries where many companies are involved, and that makes it easier in terms of collecting information because you have access to more patients. Okay, so the next part of this of the part 5 of the risk management plan is about preventing and minimizing those risks, again, the safety concern that you've identified for your product. So again, you have the routine risk minimization measures and the additional risk minimization measure. So if we start with the routine, the main tools are the summary of product characteristic and the product information. So the first document is for the prescriber, the second document is for the patient. And you will find all the information about managing a certain risk. Maybe it's about monitoring some values. For instance, you know there's an hepatic risk, so you will put in place a set of once you've prescribed the medicine, test to go to your doctor again to do some tests for your liver. You also have the pack size, which is a way to control the number of dosage units that you will give to the patient. And finally, the legal status. Again, it's a way to restrict the way the medicinal product will be prescribed and delivered. For instance, you want your product to be only delivered by an oncologist because they have the knowledge and it's going to be safer rather than your general practitioner. So that's the kind of restriction you put in place. So those are routine, and now we can look at the additional risk minimization measures. So you can see on that slide you have a long list of measures that you can put in place. Of course, it will depend on your product and the type of problem you've identified for your product. It can be targeted to healthcare professional. So what we call the healthcare professional educational program. So for instance, it can be a specific training that the physician has to go through before he's able to prescribe the medicine. For some radiopharmaceutical products, we see it often because it's complicated to use, or in a surgery setting, sometimes a very complicated method of administration means that the physician will have to go through this training. It can be at the level of the pharmacist. Before he dispenses medicine, he will have to go through a checklist. Then the second aspect is, of course, targeted to the patient. So you might be familiar with the concept of patient alert card. In case of a big safety risk, in oncology, for instance, risk of neutropenia, then you will ask the patient to carry this card and to show it to every healthcare professional he sees, so that everyone is aware, and it will. There's also on this card most often how to identify the signs and symptoms of the risk, so that the patient will react quickly. Control access program, for example, the pregnancy prevention program, again, is very specific to some sort of medicines. Is, for instance, if you want to make sure that your female patient, is not pregnant, she will have to go through pregnancy tests, and they have to show that those tests are negative before they can be prescribed the medicines. And finally, one last thing that was introduced with the revision of the legislation in 2012 is it's nice to have all these measures to minimize risk, this patient alert card, the training, but we want to make sure that they are effective. So with the new legislation, they've put in place a requirement to measure the effectiveness of all these measures, that the risk minimization activities that are put in place. Because we don't want them to be a burden on patient, prescriber, and in the end, they have little added value. So now they have put in place these studies that sometimes the marketing authorization holder have to conduct on how the drug is utilized or how is it used, prescribed. And we want to ensure that all the measures we put in place are effective and are achieving what we want them to achieve. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Stay put. Thanks very much indeed. So, colleagues, Claire has presented to you the approach that we take with the pharmaceutical industry in getting the industry to think about the safety profile of its product before it goes on the market, and then based on what we know and what we don't know about the safety profile of the product, then putting in place further data collection mechanisms, so studies usually, to further characterize safety issues, but also how we might minimize risks. So we know that a drug which is very effective, we want to be able to give it to patients, but it needs to be used very carefully to avoid a serious side effect. How can we do that? So how can we minimize risk? And that's really the purpose of risk management planning. I don't know if anybody's got any particular questions on that approach. Please, go ahead.
More of a comment, really. I mean, we in melanoma have quite suffered from the shortcomings in all these areas, because our trials were extremely small. So, of course, rare side effects are just not even reported. But even the ones that are, we have trials where, for example, the adjuvant trials, where the reporting of side effects in a drug that we know from previous trials are pretty toxic were equal to the placebo arm. Now, we know from the patient community that this is not the case. We know perfectly well it's high toxicity, but it did not come out in the tools that are used in the clinical trials. So, of course, I think that it's quite common amongst the patient community that we really don't like these tools that are actually being used because they're not actually useful in the real world afterwards. So I would love to see the EMA pushing to make these tools better from all aspects. I mean, I could go on also into the post-marketing situations where pharmacovigilance is just not there. The tools that are collecting the ADRs, patients are regularly wanting to access these tools that are collecting ADRs. Eudravigilance is okay. We tend to use the Uppsala Monitoring Center Vigi Access because it's kind of more accessible. And patients use this as a leverage to get their clinicians to declare side effects, which is not happening. And we see this by the amount of data that's coming into these databases. We're still seeing much more data coming in from the US than from the EU. So we need to get this better.
Can I put a question back to you before you were talking about the tools in terms of clinical trials. When you say tools, what are you thinking of particularly in the clinical trials, drug development side?
Well, the questionnaires, EQ5s, E30s, they're not. I mean, they're done monthly. They're not done on a follow-up basis for patients. They don't pick up things because they're kind of conveniently placed to be the questionnaires are used at convenient times in the process, so that any ADRs that have come up have kind of reduced. There's all kinds of complications with this, but the tools basically, the quality of life collection tools are not good.
Well, it's a really nice example, the melanoma example, because it's an area where we've had a number of new drugs where very exciting in terms of unmet medical need. But obviously, that's exactly the area where you've got lots of new drugs, really powerful drugs, and powerful in terms of being effective, but also in terms of side effects, where we need to be particularly vigilant, if I can use the term, in terms of making sure that we plan effectively. Just a couple of comments, because I think what you're really saying is could do better, and I think I fully agree. Specifically on the area of ADR reporting, the ADR reporting remains, if you like, the foundation of pharmacovigilance, and it's available for all drugs all the time, and all European citizens can do it. That said, patient reporting, which was only really accelerated in 2012 with the new legislation, where an obligation was placed on all companies and all authorities to accept patient reports. By authorities, I'm talking about national authorities rather than the European agency. The numbers are still modest within Europe. It's still in the tens of thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands. And I think there's a lot more work we could do, particularly, I think, working with patient associations to spread the gospel, if you like, that these data are really, really important for detecting new or changing safety issues. I think with really new groups of drugs, studies are also very, very important, and post-authorization safety studies. Now, whether those are prospective, randomized studies, or whether they are completely observational, there are pros and cons. But I'm sure there were studies in place and are studies in place for the groups of medicines we're talking about. But again, what I would take from your intervention is that there may be some lessons learned in this specific area which we might want to drill down into, and so I would take that back. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Claire?
No, I think the first thing that came to my mind when you talked about improving was this direct patient reporting that we have tried to promote a lot. Now there's a statement in the leaflet for encouraging patient, the system in place nationally to encourage patient reporting directly without having to go to the doctor first. So I think, there's still work to do. But
Please go ahead.
I mean, have you seen the tools that are there for in-country reporting direct from patients? They are pretty appalling. I
think that we've had feedback, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're frightening to patients for a
yeah.
start because they think they're going to be condemned in some way for reporting. They are badly written. They are, it's not difficult to get on a forum a patient to expand on its side effects to a huge and valuable degree. And yet this cannot be picked up in the tools that currently exist, and we must change that.
Let's be clear, it's very variable also. In some member states, they have rather nice systems. We've had the introduction of apps on smartphones recently, although the uptake has been quite limited. And in other member states, it's still website-based or even paper. Did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think there is a reporting tool, electronic reporting tool. I'm talking to our colleagues from Ghana or from Zimbabwe, maybe. Do you have a electronic reporting tool usable in your countries? I know that a couple of countries in Africa have adopted it.
In Ghana, we have an online reporting system. So you can report online, or you can report using a mobile phone. So that's what we do in Ghana. So
but is it for patients or only for health professionals?
Well, for both patients and healthcare professionals. So if you go online, there's a patient reporting system, and then another system where the healthcare professional can also report, and where the industry can also report.
And in Zimbabwe?
We, at the moment, only have an online reporting tool. The uptake has not been so good. It's a bit new. And then we are also in the process of developing SMS reporting.
Maybe one. Oh, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
My name is Gaia Colombo from Italy, University of Ferrara. Just a quick comment. I think that in this figure, pharmacists may play a role in order to help the patients in reporting, because as in Italy, it more often the patient will go to the local pharmacy before going to see the doctor. So I think that maybe EMA could also consider the interaction with the pharmacists. Thank you.
I think the point is very well taken, and pharmacists clearly have a critical role in healthcare delivery in general, but also in collecting data and are there at the point of receiving the medicine, and often are the first person that the patient is talking to when they go back to pick up their repeat prescription, for example. Just one little comment about Eudravigilance. There's a paper authored by this gentleman on my left, Rodrigo, which has literally gone online today about access to the Eudravigilance database. So what we might do is, if people are interested, is send it out to the network of people attending, because it sort of signposts you as to, particularly academics, how you can request, well, anybody, but I think it might be of most interest to academics, how you can request data from the Eudravigilance database to run analyses and so on. So you might be interested in that regard.
We will circulate as part of the big pack that we're sending you.
Any final questions? Please, right at the back. Miriam.
Another comment, just to say how immensely helpful the database such as Eudravigilance have been for signal generation, but also to emphasise in relation to the lady who commented earlier about how we can supplement the data, and the utility and value of real-world data has been very instrumental in trying to refine those signals. So in two areas. One is the use of improved methodology, so particularly where we look at time of event, so time to event, so a non-constant time to risk of event can help us determine if it's background noise or a real signal. And the second would be to use more appropriate comparison groups, so sometimes more appropriate comparison groups than placebo than used in the trials. So we've been able really to improve our knowledge in this area by building on the data from the pharmacovigilance networks.
Thank you for that. And clearly there's a really critical role for academia in terms of monitoring the safety of medicines, and academia will often have access to data, and particularly thinking of real-world evidence, so electronic health records, prescribing data, claims data, that can be really informative, both in terms of looking at causal associations between medicines and events, but also looking at how medicines are used in everyday medical practice. So Claire mentioned effectiveness of risk minimization. So I give you an example of a big review done by this agency in 2013 was looking at venous thromboembolism, so blood clots with the combined hormonal contraceptives. And the question was, what was the strengthened risk minimization in terms of warnings to women who were using, warnings also to doctors? Does it lead to a change in prescribing of the medicines to perhaps products with a lower risk of venous thromboembolism? Does it lead to less spontaneous, less therapeutic abortions? Does it lead to less, ideally, blood clots? These are the kind of pieces of work that academia can contribute to and actively do in many departments around Europe. So I think if there's no other questions, then I've already introduced him twice, but I'll introduce him a third time. It's Rodrigo Postigo, who's going to talk to you about the Eudravigilance database and particularly focus on the core use of the database, which is to detect new or changing safety issues that we can then assess and take action to protect public health. Over to you, Rodrigo.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, with this presentation, I'm going to try to give you an overview of the EU signal management procedure, and also I will introduce you to the Eudravigilance database, but I have seen that some of the colleagues already know the database and have been consulted the portal. I will start explaining first what is a signal. The definition of signal is coming from the CIOMS Working Group 8. The CIOMS is the Council for International Organizations of Medical Science. And it says there that a signal is information that arises from one or multiple sources, including observations and experiments, which suggest a new potential causal association or a new aspect of a known association between an intervention and an event or a set of related events, either adverse or beneficial, that is judged to be of sufficient likelihood to justify verificatory action. Well, it is a bit of a long definition, but in more lay language, we need to keep in mind that a signal is something new about the safety profile of a product, something new about an adverse reaction, and differs from an identified risk. A signal is something that justifies more action, and from the signal, we need to do a thorough analysis to confirm whether this association is a risk or not. This definition was also included in the European legislation. So it was the updated pharmacovigilance legislation published in 2010 and 2012 what established the principles for monitoring the data in the Eudravigilance database to determine whether there are new risks or whether risks have changed or whether those risks have an impact in the benefit-risk balance of the medicinal product. The European legislation also established the role of the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, the PRAC, in signal detection, and it says there that the PRAC shall perform initial analysis, prioritization, and the assessment of signals, and when necessary, agree on any action concerning the marketing authorization of the product. And also the legislation established the different steps in the signal management process that I'm going to take you through in a minute. Just to let you know that the guideline for signal management, what incorporates the legislative requirements plus the guidance on the implementation, is the Good Vigilance Practice Module 9 on signal management, which was updated last year in October. So these are all the steps of the signal management process. So we start with detection and validation, confirmation, analysis and prioritization, assessment, and recommendation for action. And you will see later on how from the first analysis and prioritization, we will have a preliminary recommendation for action. Regarding the different roles in this cycle, detection and validation is performed by the EMA, the member states, and the marketing authorization holders. Confirmation is done by the PRAC rapporteur or the lead member state. This is depending if the product is a centrally authorized product or a nationally authorized product. And then from the analysis and the prioritization to the recommendation is the role of the PRAC. And as you can imagine, there is a lot of exchange of information in this cycle. I'll start with signal detection, and we can detect signals by looking at safety databases, by looking at scientific literature, and also from safety communications. Anyone can alert us about a new signal. And the signals may contain information from spontaneous reports, from clinical trials, observational studies, pharmacoepi data, and also non-clinical data. And when we look at safety databases in the context of the European regulatory network, we need to look at Eudravigilance. So what is Eudravigilance? In case you don't know, is the common pharmacovigilance database that is accessible at a single point within the European community. Eudravigilance contains information on suspected adverse reactions from both clinical trials and also from post-authorization phases. And the cases to Eudravigilance are transmitted by the national competent authorities, marketing authorization holders, and sponsors of clinical trials. So as we just discussed, patients cannot submit directly to Eudravigilance the ADR reports. They do it through the national competent authorities or the marketing authorization holders. And Eudravigilance also contains medicinal product information, and it is something very technical that we call the XCVMPD. It is the Extended Eudravigilance Medicinal Product Dictionary, but basically we need a dictionary of drugs to link the drug with the reaction so we can query the database and get outcomes and then perform the analysis from there. What is the main purpose of Eudravigilance? Well, it's to support the protection of public health by collecting the suspected ADRs in pre- and post-authorization phases, supporting the monitoring and evaluation of the potential safety issues within the EU regulatory authorities, again, for clinical trials and for post-marketing, also monitoring compliance with expedited reporting requirements, and we can monitor not only just the compliance, but the data quality of the reports submitted. We can monitor the identified and the potential safety issues that are outlined in the EU risk management plan, and also we can support the decision-making process done by the different EMA committees performing analysis from the database when needed. Some key dates: Eudravigilance was launched first in 2001. It was in May 2004 that was extended to clinical trials. The first launch was only for post-marketing cases. In November 2005 was when the electronic reporting was mandatory, and this is something that is governed by the ICH E2B and also now the ISO ICSR standard, but don't worry much about it. It was in June 2007 when the Eudravigilance data analysis system was available to the NCAs. And this data analysis system is basically a tool or an interface for the users of Eudravigilance to query the data that is in the database. And it was last year, in November 2017, a big milestone for Eudravigilance because it became the central repository for all the EEA suspected adverse reactions data. So basically, all the cases are submitted to Eudravigilance, and from the EMA, we forward or we reroute the cases to the different national competent authorities. So from November, everybody submit just once to Eudravigilance, and then the database becomes the central hub to get the data from. So once we have, well, just to mention, but we mentioned this already, Eudravigilance access to the general public, it is available in the European database of suspected adverse reactions with information in all European languages. You can see not only the data, but also explanations about how to understand the data. And you have aggregated data stratified in very different parameters. But from November also, you have patient-level data or kept data on the individual cases. Obviously, this is all in line with data protection to protect any identification of individual subjects. So once we have screened the data in Eudravigilance and we may have detected some signals, we move to the next step, which is the signal validation. And signal validation is the process of evaluating the current data available for the detected signal to verify that further analysis is needed. And in real terms, we move from aggregated data and from statistical analysis, we move to analyze the individual cases to see if the signal is valid, and then we should further escalate it and we should take further actions. How we organize this signal detection and validation in Eudravigilance within the network? It is the agency, the EMA, that takes the lead for monitoring Eudravigilance, so for signal detection and validation for centrally authorized products, and the national competent authorities take the lead for the validation and detection of signals for nationally authorized products. So this is a kind of work-sharing agreement between the EMA and the national competent authorities. This is the tool that we use to start the monitoring of Eudravigilance. It is called the Electronic Reaction Monitoring Report and provides us aggregated data, so the number of cases in the interval and cumulatively, because we monitor Eudravigilance in cycles, so we focus on the new cases we have received since the last time we monitored the database. We use statistical signal detection. We use a measure of disproportionality, and the measure we use is the reporting odds ratio, or the ROR, and this is going to give us an idea that something in the database has been reported more than expected. We look at the clinical relevance of the reaction, the biological plausibility according to the mechanism of the drug, if there is temporal association between the administration and the development of the reaction, the challenge and rechallenge information that are very pharmacovigilance terminology, but what happened if the drug was discontinued, what happened to the reaction, and very important, what happened if the drug was reintroduced, if the reaction appeared or not. Again, something we call positive rechallenge, and is very nice to have for causal association. We look at confounders and alternative explanations. It could be concomitant medication. It could be that the reaction is confounded by the disease. We look at drug interactions, and obviously a signal has to bring us something new. So we need to look at the previous awareness in the risk management plan, in the PSURs, and the product information, and also any source of information that may help us at the moment of the signal validation, like literature or clinical trial information that we may have in-house. So when we have considered that a validated signal requires further analysis, the legislation says that it shall be confirmed no later than 30 days by the PRAC rapporteur or the lead member state. So we enter this signal in something that we call EPIT, and it is the European Pharmacovigilance Issues Tracking Tool. It is a tracking tool that contains all our signals, and from there we communicate it to the network, to the PRAC members and the member states for the responsible person to confirm or not the signal. And once the signal has been confirmed, then we pass it to the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee. It is introduced in the PRAC agenda for the initial analysis and prioritization. So the signal is discussed at the PRAC, and at this time, the PRAC recommendation could be that no specific action is needed. The most popular one, or the most common one, is that we need more additional information, or maybe need for regulatory action when the data is so clear and we need to take immediate action. The PRAC may decide to take actions immediately. After the validation, the confirmation, and the initial analysis and prioritization by the PRAC, we move to the signal assessment, and this is the process of evaluation of all evidence that has been gathered following the initial analysis. And in here, we incorporate the data and the responses from the marketing authorization holders, and we may incorporate also additional analyses that are performed by the regulators, by working parties, or by any in Eudravigilance or in any other sources. The analysis of the signal is led by a rapporteur that is appointed by the PRAC. It's done according to an agreed timetable, and the timetables are published in the EMA website, and leads to a further PRAC recommendation that could be, again, that we need more data or the update of the product information is needed. Regarding communications and transparency, Anielo mentioned some of them already, but we have an advanced notification of signals on the PRAC agenda, and this is sent to all the QPPVs. It was something demanded by the marketing authorization holders because they wanted to know as soon as possible if a signal for the products was going to be discussed at the PRAC. We publish the PRAC agenda, and the PRAC agenda contains all the confirmed signals. We publish the recommendations. And when the recommendation is that we need to update the product information, we publish the translations of the product information in all the European languages. So the message that the PRAC has agreed, or the warning, it is implemented in a harmonized way across the different countries. We submit the assessment reports, so we share the assessment reports with the concerned marketing authorization holders, and we also publish the PRAC minutes, and you can find the discussions on the signal in the different PRAC minutes. So just to give you some idea of the scope of this exercise, only in 2017, the EMA signal management team reviewed in detail a total of over 2,000 potential signals, and these are just drug event combinations from the screening of Eudravigilance, also from the screening of medical literature or information that we received from other regulatory authorities. 81% of those were originated from the screening of the Eudravigilance database. And from those 2,000, 43 were prioritized and assessed by the PRAC. It was in September 2012 the first time that the PRAC discussed signals, and from there until the end of 2017, there have been 403 signals evaluated by the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee. And average 50% of them led to an update of the product information. You have there the rest of the outcomes from the PRAC recommendations. From November 2017, now marketing authorization holders have access to Eudravigilance to comply with their pharmacovigilance obligations. And this is to ensure the continuous monitoring of Eudravigilance by the MAHs. And when they detect a signal, marketing authorization holders, then they need to validate the signal or no. And the validated signals, they should inform the EMA and the national competent authorities. This has started now in February 2017, and now we are kind of incorporating all of these signals validated by MAHs into the signal cycle that I have explained. So this is something new, and this is something recently started, and we are implementing the new access by marketing authorization holders. I will just finish with 4 take-home messages or conclusions. The EU signal management process was implemented in 2012. This has further strengthened the link between the scientific assessments and the regulatory actions, and therefore delivering public health. With the new access to Eudravigilance data, the safety monitoring has been reinforced with the incorporation of marketing authorization holders, and we've done truly efforts, the EMA and the medicines regulatory authorities, to increase the transparency and the communication aspects regarding signals. So if you want to know more, I included some links there related to the signal management process that you want to consult if this is interesting for you. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So the coalface, really, of pharmacovigilance, detecting new or changing safety issues, one of the key tools being the Eudravigilance database, but as Rodrigo has outlined, not the only tool. Please, over to you, sir.
So just a few questions. Steve Anderson from FDA. How many total reports are submitted to Eudravigilance on an annual basis?
1.5 million.
So it's interesting. So the new Eudravigilance system was launched last November, 22nd of November. It was a big day for the agency. Fingers crossed, and it all went well in the end. But the rules on what is reported into this central hub changed. So until November, we didn't receive non-serious reports, for example. Since November, we started receiving non-serious reports. And for those who aren't familiar, this is defined in regulations, but something is serious if it's fatal or life-threatening, or if it leads to hospitalization, or if people are permanently disabled by the reaction. Clearly, there are huge amounts of side effects going on out there in the community. Only a small proportion of those are reported into the national agencies or to the marketing authorization holders. And prior to November, a smaller proportion of those came into the central hub because it was only the serious reports. The other thing that's changed is that up until last November, we only received a subset of reports from outside the EU. And since November, we've received a bigger subset, still not everything. We don't get non-serious stuff from outside the EU, but we get all serious reports from outside the EU. So we've gone up from just under 1 million reports a year. We anticipate will be more like 1.5 million reports per year from now on.
All right, and just to follow up, so how are your signals mostly identified? Are those through the tools that you use, and then I guess, how many reports get reviewed by sort of individuals at EMA? So like, for instance, do you have staff sort of reviewing reports, for instance, some of the serious adverse event reports by hand at all, or is it just sort of using automated tools and that kind of thing?
The main tool we use is the reaction monitoring report that I have shown in the presentation. That report provides us, we look at the drugs every 2 weeks or every month, depending if the drug is in the additional monitoring list or not. So every month, the report provides us with the interval data and the cumulative data, so we can put the new reports received in the context of the whole database. And apart from the number of reports, we have a statistical analysis. We have signals of disproportionate reporting, and we also combine designated medical events with signals of disproportionate reporting with fatal cases to do a kind of prioritization of the reports. We basically look at all that has been reported in a cumulative way. And from the cumulative way, depending on what is already listed, what are the identified risks, the potential risks, we decide which ones we are going to take further and analyze the individual cases. And those are the 2,000 that we have analyzed only in 2017. Did I?
Maybe just to complement that, we've got to bear in mind that we're doing there's signal detection done in Eudravigilance at EU level, but there's also signal detection done in individual national competent authorities. And I think in many of the national competent authorities, because the number of reports is lower, they're spending more time scrutinizing individual case reports. Because of the 1.5 million that we've got in the per year in the central hub, we're taking a more statistical approach to do the initial signaling, and then the colleagues go back and look at the original reports.
15.
Well, yeah. So the question that Anya's put to me was how many people are working on it. It depends how you define that. So if you include the people in the pharmaceutical industry now, the EMA, about 15 staff looking at the cases. 15. So that's what 100,000 case reports per staff member. But you've also got all of the national competent authorities where we have many hundreds of staff across the European network doing pharmacovigilance. Exactly what proportion of those staff are doing signal detection versus looking at periodic safety update reports that you're about to hear, I have to say I can't tell you. So, colleagues, if there are no... Please, sir, go ahead, and then we'll take that as the last question before going on to the...
It's going to be a quick one, however. Sven Schubert of the European Association for the Study of Obesity. Are there any plans to centralize the patient reporting of ADRs? And if not, what is the advantage to leave it to the national levels as it is?
Okay, so that's a really important question. It's quite a political one, actually. So the changes in 2000 with the new legislation in the recent years have led to some centralization of pharmacovigilance. But when the European legislators, so the European Parliament and Council of Ministers, were discussing what should be done at European level and what should be done at national level, the collection of data from citizens and the final communication to citizens was considered much better done, if you like, locally. And I think everybody at EMA supports that fully, because, let's be clear, some ivory tower in Canary Wharf in London is probably not the best place for people from all over Europe to be picking up the phone to get hold of. People want to speak in their language, and they want somebody a bit closer to home. In some countries, France is probably the best example, of course you have regional centres, where many of the sort of big regional towns will have a pharmacovigilance centre, and you don't even report to the national centre, you report to your regional centre. And it means that you've got usually a information pharmacist who can give feedback to the clinician, who can potentially give feedback to the patients directly. I don't think that's likely in my lifetime to change. I think the member states will always remain the principal receivers of data from their citizens and the principal people to distribute information to their citizens. Agnes, please.
But Peter, you were able from Eudravigilance to identify what comes from patient versus what comes from healthcare professionals. So we can, in the overall compilation, we can separate what comes from patient and not patient.
Just one final comment before we go on to PSURs. There's, I think, a lot more work to be done to really optimize both the levels of patient reporting, but also what we do with patient reports to find out about the safety of medicines. There's some work that's already been done that shows that patients tell you different things about their side effects, but it tends to be more about impact on their lives. They tend to use less medical jargon and more about symptoms. And we've not really fully optimized this difference in data, and I think it's an opportunity for the future. So thank you, sir. I think thank you very much indeed. So we go on to the last presentation. We're more or less on time. So Gail Beck is going to talk to us about periodic safety update reports, benefit risk reports from the industry, key to monitoring the safety of products on the market. Over to you, Gail.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm pleased to give this presentation about periodic safety update report that we call PSUR. So in my presentation, I will go through the main aspect of this document. So what is it for, how is it submitted, and how is it assessed, and what we do to improve the process here at the EMA. So a PSUR is also called the Periodic Benefit Risk Evaluation Report. It's a pharmacovigilance report that is prepared by the marketing authorization holders, and it describes the worldwide safety experience with the medicine over its life cycle, and it's provided after the authorization of the product. So it provides an analysis on the safety, efficacy, and also effectiveness of the product over its life cycle, and it's focused on new information that has been received during the period under review, and it's put in the context of a cumulative experience. So the purpose is to really define if there are any new risk, if the risk has changed, and conclude on the benefit risk of the product during this reporting period. So submission of PSUR is a legal requirement established in the legislation. So marketing authorization holders should submit PSUR at different time for products. There are some products exempt from this requirement, such as generics, well-established use product, homeopathic and herbal medicine products, unless it has been specifically required by the competent authority. The PSUR format is quite standard and also defined in the legislation and ICH guideline. It has a modular aspect and 20 sections. It's quite good because some section can be reused for other purposes, other procedures, or other, regulatory authorities. The first 5 sections really set the scene about the product and give some background information, such as worldwide marketing approval status, or if any action have been taken during the period under review. The main content are sections 6 to 15, which give a summary of the data and new safety information that have been received from post-marketing authorization or ongoing clinical trial or literature. The last section really focus on the benefit risk evaluation and conclude if it has changed or not. PSUR are to be submitted after approval of medicine, as I said before. Their submission is set in the list of Union reference dates that we call the URD list. which is the list published on EMA portal, and I will talk about that in my next slide. Although the submission requirements are set up in this list, the general principle is that for new active substances authorized in the EU, the first PSUR should cover the 6 months period after the authorization of the product. And subsequently, after a certain period of time, this period can be changed to yearly, 3 yearly, or more. The URD list, so the European Union reference dates, contain a list of active substances and combination of active substances authorized in the EU for which a PSUR should be submitted. So it contains the list of active substances. It contains the European reference date, which corresponds to the date where the product was first authorized in the EU, the active substance. It also includes the frequency of the PSUR submission, so 1 year, 3 years or more, or 6 months, the data log point, and the submission date. So marketing authorization holders have the responsibility to check this list and comply with the regulatory requirements. They have access to this list because it's publicly available. It's updated every month, and it's a lively document. It's allow an harmonization of frequency of PSUR submission. It's optimized also the management and the assessment of PSUR, and it increases the predictability of PSUR submission. PSUR are submitted through a common storage that we call the PSUR repository, and this is quite new. It's been introduced in 2016. So marketing authorization holder can upload their PSUR through this repository, and it will be accessible to authorized users from the EMA or national competent authorities. Marketing authorization holder can only upload their PSUR. They don't have access to PSUR from other marketing authorization holders. In this document, you can also see assessment reports from the committee or also responses from marketing authorization holder in case there have been any questions during the assessment of the PSUR. So the PSUR single assessment process, it means that there is one single evaluation of PSUR of medicine containing the same active substances or same combination of active substances. This means that there can be that there are several PSUR from different marketing authorization holders assessed in one evaluation. It can include centrally authorized product and or nationally authorized product. The assessment is performed by a representative from the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee that we call a rapporteur when there is a centrally authorized product involved, or by a lead member state when only the nationally authorized products are involved. Usually it's a reference member state. The assessment takes 60 days. Then there is an assessment report that is produced by this rapporteur, and it's shared with the marketing authorization holder and members from the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee. And from that time, marketing authorization holder have 30 days to comment or respond to questions that may have been addressed in these documents. After that, there is a period of 15 days to produce an updated assessment report. Following that, there is an outcome and a conclusion on the benefit risk of the product, has it changed or not. So it can be a maintenance, which means that the marketing authorization has not changed, there is nothing to do more, or it can be a variation, so it's when the marketing authorization change. Usually it could be that the product information needs to be updated. For instance, we had a new adverse event or new wording in the product information. There are also possibility to have suspension or revocation of the marketing authorization following the PSUR single assessments. So in summary, the PSUR single assessment is ready to evaluate any new or emerging information on the risk, on the efficacy and effectiveness. It's put in the context of cumulative experience and knowledge while retaining a focus on new information. It's allowed to conduct an integrated benefit risk evaluation for the approved indications. outcome of PSUR single assessment are published on EMA websites under the product webpage that we call the Open Public Assessment Report. It's also available on the Community Register, the European Commission website, and we also have a dedicated webpage for only nationally authorized products where we can find the outcome. Because we want to continue improvement of PSUR single assessment, we have put in place roadmap activities in order to identify key issues that are encountered by industry or regulator in preparation of PSUR. It's to also share best practice with those people and to address their key issues. And for instance, we have developed the explanatory note to GVP Module 7 to raise awareness to the industry and Q&A for assessors. This is my last slide, and I have included useful link if you're interested to know more about PSUR. And I thank you very much. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Gail. Now, some of you will have found that very dry. For regulators like me, I find it very exciting because we've gone from a situation where some of you will understand what I'm about to say, a situation where an individual company for an individual product would send in a safety report, and then maybe 3 months later, another company for their product, which had exactly the same substance in it, would send in a safety report. And all of these reports were being assessed in a rather haphazard and chaotic manner across the EU by different authorities. We've now got a situation with the new legislation where we publish a date and we say all companies that have a product, apart from the generics, all companies that have a product containing a particular active substance, a particular substance, submit your report on that day, and they're all assessed together, and you have one output. And we've just, in fact, this week we've had the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee running. We probably had about 80 of these assessments running through the committee. And for a number of them, we had some really quite important outputs. And the outputs are directly applicable to the products. So it means that you get very rapid changes to the patient leaflets, to the summaries of product characteristics. New warnings, basically, is usually the effect. Or a new contraindication, don't use if you've got liver failure or whatever. Now that, for a regulator, is quite an important process improvement, if you like. Perhaps to some of you, it's just off your radar screen. Questions or comments to Gail? Periodic safety update reports, please. Please, go ahead.
I didn't quite hear what you said about generics and herbal medicines. I heard you say something about it, but I didn't quite catch.
Yes.
Is there a requirement for them to submit these?
So yeah, PSUR should be submitted for all products, but generic are exempt from these requirements unless specifically required by the competent authority, by EMA, if we consider that there is a need to review also PSUR from generics. But this is included in, as I said, in the URD list and is clearly defined if it's needed or not. So it's the same for well-established use product, homeopathic and herbal medicinal products.
So just to be clear, it was a major change 5 years ago, 6 years ago, because previously all the products, whether they were generics or innovator, were sending in periodic safety update reports, and it was felt to be not very good use of time, effort, and wasn't having much of an impact on public health. So now the focus is on the innovator products. However, where a safety issue is thought to be, where data from a generic company is thought to be highly relevant, let's say the innovator product has come off the market, let's say the majority of the market share is by one or two generics companies, then we as regulators can mark this famous list that we publish, and then the generics companies by law have to submit. So it's not a complete exemption, but the default is no generics. Maybe just one other thing to mention, the list, the so-called EURD list, we haven't really made a lot of noise about it with international partners and international regulators, but it's quite an innovation. So if you in your regulatory authority wanted to know what was being submitted to the EU regulators and when, you can just look on this list. And you know, if you understand our procedures, and if you don't, please just send us an email and we'll tell you what. You can work out that 6 months later, there'll be something on our website which is our conclusions based on that report. So if you wanted to look at our reports in the context of your assessment, or even if you wanted to ask for companies to submit at the same time that they're submitting to the EU, you have all the information you need to do that. So we've not got into situations yet where we're having teleconferences on PSURs with other regulators around the world. And with 80-odd assessments going through the committee every month, that would be quite a tall order. But what we do have is high levels of transparency, so you know when they're coming in and you know what the conclusions are at the end. Other questions or comments before we conclude? I think we're in the last 60 seconds of the pharmacovigilance session. I think we may even be in borrowed time. I can feel the stairs coming across. If not, may I, big thanks to Agnello, to Claire, to Rodrigo and Gail, and thank you for your questions and interest. Thank you.